it's an amazing, it's like buying a boat, right? The day you buy that boat, the day you take that investor check is the best day of your life. And the next best day is the day you sell that boat and the day you sell that startup.
Are you an entrepreneur or are you an investor? What if you were both? Our guest today has worn both hats and currently wears both hats. She is a successful female technology serial entrepreneur, and she's currently tackling women's health through technology. But she's also an angel investor and a successful one. So the conversation today is going to take us down both journeys and the importance of both journeys and the perspectives and lenses that both journeys have. There's a beautiful movement right now bringing about awareness and empowerment in women's health and how we can grow and invest in that. There's also a beautiful movement about how can we invest in female founders and minority founders and move that needle from less than 2% of VC and private equity funds going into female and minority founders. So let's change the narrative today. Let's talk about women's health and technology, and let's talk about investing. Excited for you to join this conversation that I'm having with Erynn Petersen on today's episode of the GSD Factor podcast, where we're going to get shit done. Erynn Petersen, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Good. Thanks, Misha. I'm really glad to talk to you today.
Yes. All right. We have a jam-packed session today that we're going to talk about, and I'm really excited to have you share with our listeners really quick a little bit about your story.
Sure. I started out, my first job in technology was at a little company called Amazon. They sold books online, and you got hired basically based on your SAT score and whether you'd been world class at anything. It was very, very small. So I started working at this company called Amazon and was there while we grew quite a bit. So I was there from 97 to 2000 and 2002. And after that, I did my first startup, which I sold in 2004. And from there, I went into big companies. So I went to Microsoft to build what's now Bing, the search engine from scratch. I went to AOL, where I got to work on, all their products worldwide. Time Inc., where I got to work on all their brands worldwide. From there, I made a very unexpected detour into the Department of Defense, which is where I got to also think about scale in a completely different way. And then I moved into healthcare because once you've been working in defense, like healthcare, you can do healthcare.
Such an amazing journey. And I love how it's been in technology and been in different industry sectors. And I think for a lot of our female listeners, right, I think that will really resonate for a lot of them. So let's talk about, as a serial entrepreneur and, all the successes that you've seen, what are you focused on now as it relates to technology and being that female entrepreneur?
What I'm focused on now is how do we channel the power of technology to further, this is going to sound technical, but to further the day-to-day outcomes for the average person on the street. One of the things that I love about Microsoft is its clear mission to help use technology to bring out every individual person's potential. And there are so many stories right now of how technology is used to solve things that are, interesting, going to space, ordering up cars on demand. But there are so many day-to-day problems that people face that can also be solved by technology. Simple things like, how do I find a doctor? How do I find a doctor today? How do I make sure I know how much it's going to cost? How do I make sure that my kids feel safe going to school? How do I connect to people in my community? And so finding ways to bring technology to bear on solving these more prosaic but meaningful problems for people is really important to me.
And what I love about your focus too is in the area of women's health and making sure that there's such a movement right now to equip us, to empower us, And, so what have you seen as you've kind of dived into this technology for health, but mainly focused on that women's health?
Such a great question. So here's where inevitably I get on a soapbox, right? There are a few things that stand out for me about technology and women's health. One is, my own experience as a woman in healthcare. I've been pregnant, I've had children, I have kids who are gender non-normative. They go to the doctor as well. Our experiences are varied and frankly not always fantastic. I have some great healthcare right now. I haven't always had great healthcare. I've had people who have not planned to share all the information with me about decisions. I've learned to be empowered as a consumer and ask things, right? So, giving women the tools to just ask. I had a minor surgery earlier this week, and they just simply said, "We're going to use anesthesia." I'm like, "Great. What anesthesia? How long is it going to last? What is it going to cost?" And they're like, "Oh my gosh, okay, we'll give you all these answers." So, empowering other women to feel comfortable asking. And then the other thing that uh, has become really important to me is giving women the tools to avoid the feeling of gaslighting. Whether they're being gaslit or not, they feel like they are. And it's one thing to walk into a doctor and say, "Hey, my period is 13 days late," or "I've realized that my mood is off relative to my period," or "Hey, you know what? I haven't had sex regularly in the last year, and before that I was having sex once a week." And it's one thing to walk in with that narrative. It's another to walk in with an app and show them, "Look, I've been tracking this every single day. This is what it looks like." They take it more seriously. They're able to engage a little bit more effectively. So bringing women that tool is really important. And then the thing that's become incredibly important to me is empowering women to feel comfortable asking the questions required to make good financial decisions around their medical care. As we've taken on this project at Emmy, which is my startup, to provide people with the data around how much healthcare should cost. How much is your healthcare going to cost? And one of the things that has blown my mind as we've negotiated, for example, for women for the cost of our healthcare, is the number of times that people have tried to shame us for asking. And I'm like, no, 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 no. Like somebody tried to do this to me at the doctor's office last week. I had medical care. It was unexpected. They said, "Here's the bill." The billing office manager actually whispered it to me. She said, "This is going to be $15,331." And I was like, "Great. That's our starting point. How much is it going to be if I pay cash today?" And I know that most people can't sit in a room and say, "How much if I pay cash today?" But we were able to negotiate it immediately down to $9,000 within the space of 5 minutes. I'm like, "Okay, fantastic. So let's take that $9,000 and then let's go forward." And then a few days later, different billing person, same office. I was scheduling my follow up appointment for March. She gave me the cost of the appointment. I said, "Well, how if I pay in cash?" Like, "Oh, we don't do cash discounts." And I'm like, "No, no, 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 no. A, you're not going to shame me. And B, yes, you do." So now we're on this mission to also empower women in that way because 73% of women don't go to the doctor, not because they're specifically afraid of the cost, but because they don't know how much it's going to cost. And it's that fear of the unknown of the cost of their medical care that's keeping people from getting basic care. And I want that to go away.
Some incredible examples. And I think that's how we change the narrative. We change the story by empowering with data, right? Because a lot of times, I talk about our voice is our strongest weapon, but when
Mhm.
you can align your voice and your words with the data behind it, I mean,
Mhm.
it just takes that conversation so much further.
Yes. And it really, I don't usually use the word sisterhood. It's very rare for me to use this word, right? But one of the people that we empowered to negotiate the cost of her healthcare, somebody tried to shame her. She got a little bit nervous. And then she realized, no, there are all these women behind me. They're not ashamed. And it emboldened her to negotiate the cost of her healthcare. And she went from not being able to afford her ultrasound to being able to set up her ultrasound and get it 2 weeks later and no longer be worried about whether or not she had breast cancer.
That's so important. And I think in today's day and age, right, we need to be intentional and um leverage our technology to continue to empower us and encourage us and equip us for those conversations and equip us to have those, and really empower us with that confidence to be able to say, I know what I need. I am my best advocate, and I have, I have this support from whoever it is, right? The women before us, the women behind us, the app with the data that's helping us. It's saying, well, no, right here it says whatever that is, it's empowering us with that confidence to move forward and to be. We talk a lot about within our GSD Factor Life being influential. And I think in this case, it's being influential and being a leader for yourself, not just being an influential leader for others.
Yes. And also there's this sense of when you have this sense that other women that you like and respect are very comfortable asking a doctor's office, how much is this going to cost? It makes you feel less alone and it makes you feel more confident and less easily, shamed into not asking.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So love what you're doing with Emmy and the different data points and the different empowerment. So kudos to you on that. I'd love to shift our conversation now and let's talk about it from an investor perspective. I think, there's a huge movement right now around how do we increase um, female investment in female founders. That number is still less than 2%. This is something I'm personally very passionate about. But, I think what's important as we have female entrepreneurs listening is also now let's talk about it from the investment side, because I think what happens a lot of times is there's a lot of myths. There's a lot of, and I think it's similar to women finding out what the cost is around their healthcare. I think that there's a lot of misunderstanding, misinformation around what does it take to be an investor, but then also as an entrepreneur, like when I am asking for money or I'm raising or any of those things, what are some of the questions that I'm going to be asked, and not to be shamed in asking them and not to be shamed in answering them, but just simply being confident and ready and equipped to answer those questions and understand that side of the industry?
That is such a great set of questions. And I don't think it's asked enough. So I'm really happy that you're asking it. So there's two ways that I engage in the community. I engage as an investor and I engage as somebody who's now running a startup. And I did my first startup in 2001, 2002, and sold that in 2004. So I have this history of what capital has looked like and the distribution of startup capital has looked like in the United States and how that has changed. And it's changed quite a bit in the last 20 to 30 years. So let me think about how I want to tackle this. I think I want to tackle this first from the investor perspective, because I think it informs how I think about this as running a startup. So when I think about how I invest in projects, there's two ways that I think about it right now. One is, how do I invest as an angel in startups? I'm an investor right now in 3 startups. And how in the past, when I've managed really big budgets, I mean, I've managed budgets in the hundreds of millions of dollars, and how have I decided where to place bets with that budget, right? And it's not a dissimilar process. When I'm investing in startups and I'm investing in really small companies, it's more about just placing bets. And it's only partly for me as an angel investor a bet on whether or not I'm actually going to make a lot of money on a startup. It's more a bet on this person and investing in this person and their idea and building a relationship. I think about there's a stellar technologist that I know, and I've known her since 2010. I invested in her startup in 2011. I was her first check. And, her startup did fine, but that relationship has been incredibly valuable to me. And it's been worth its weight in gold. And so when I'm investing in startups, I'm like, hey, maybe this startup will do something. Maybe it won't. There's a startup right now that's I'm invested in, it's doing incredibly well. Uh, but it's the relationships that are important. The flip side is the institutional investor money. And that is something that I'm familiar with in large part because I have been in startups that have received institutional money. And I've seen what happens once you take that institutional money. And it is really easy to say, as a startup person, well, in fact, I just had this conversation last night with a startup. VCs are rapacious. They just want to, they just want to get all the money out of you. They just want to get on your board and tell you what to do. And I'm like, no. Investors have limited partners that they themselves are answering to. They have numbers they're looking at. This is math. They're not trying to take control of your company because they want to control your company. They're looking at your numbers. They're seeing your customer acquisition costs are too high. They're seeing your lifetime value is too low. They're seeing that you're shipping bugs too frequently and that you're not shipping updates fast enough. They're giving you advice, and listening would be in your best interest, not just because it's easier to manage a relationship with an investor when you're listening, but because often they know what they're talking about. Like there's an investor, I would have to go back and check before I identified him, but I was really lucky. I feel that I was very lucky that I got to work closely with him. He was very unhappy with the performance of the project that I was working on. And we ended up in a daily meeting with him. He was ripping this project apart. He was very unhappy about the trajectory and pace of this project. He was no hold bars on it. I learned more from his engagement in 3 months than I've learned in 10 years of business. And so even running this startup, and this is sort of where I'll bring it back, when I'm running this startup, I'm thinking about this from the perspective of, does this startup make sense for friends and family? Does this startup make sense for institutional investors? And I can tell you a little bit about the trajectory of Emmy. I acquired Emmy. It had been acquired by another company, hadn't seen any investment, was a birth control app. It had data from 30,000 women. That data had never been sold. I didn't want that data sold. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to buy this and then figure out if there's a business there, figure out if there's a company there. So I bought this, and Emmy is a beautiful app, has a beautiful case to hold your birth control. And what I quickly realized is that essentially it was a product, and a product is not a company. Those are two different things. And it was absolutely an outstanding product, and I love it dearly. I'm like, okay, so let's go ahead and run this as a product, but you don't raise institutional money for a product. You raise institutional money for a company because institutional investors themselves have an obligation to their limited partners to return a certain amount of money back. And so if they take you into your portfolio and you're not one of the members of the portfolio that looks like it's going to return the level of investment they need, they go cold on you. And sometimes, frankly, they shut you down because it costs them more in terms of attention to manage a failing startup than it does for them to manage a successful startup. So they're just going to, kill you off. It's just the nature of the beast. So we were at the time a product. We weren't a company. But what we discovered in working with our users is the large number of users that are not getting medical care because they're afraid of pricing. So now we're transitioning to adding as a member benefit the ability for members to book their medical care and know in advance how much it's going to cost. And through this, we've discovered this is a very big opportunity. So this is on the order of tens of billions of dollars. It affects over 80% of American households. It is a game changer. It is, if successful, the beginning of a platform that revolutionizes how healthcare is delivered today in the United States. That is a company. And it's a big bet. And that means that we are in a position now to go out and raise institutional dollars from people who are like, I will place a bet on you. And I also know that once I take those dollars, the clock starts ticking. And we need to be able to demonstrate the growth and the progress and performance that makes sense within an institutional investor's portfolio. And on the one hand, it's an amazing, it's like buying a boat, right? The day you buy that boat, the day you take that investor check is the best day of your life. And the next best day is the day you sell that boat and the day you sell that startup, right? And that's how we're thinking about it. It's an incredible thing to have an institutional investor banking on you and betting on you. And there's a lot of pressure that comes with it. And it's really important, I think, to know what you're getting into and be prepared to deliver against the expectations you set with them.
So many amazing nuggets in there. And I think that, and I loved how you brought it on both sides and both lenses, right? Both from investing, becoming an angel investor and or a limited partner and being the funds to those portfolio companies, but also being on the receiving end of it. And what does that mean and what are they looking for? And as I am early in my investor journey as well, it is betting on that person and it is saying, I believe in you and I believe in your company and I want to help you grow and I want to help you change the world and I want to help you get shit done. And I think that the more that we continue to take away the myths and take away the unknown, I feel like we can get more and more movement towards this, to really, it's something that I'm teaching my own daughter now, right? As she's like a new young author, but talking to her about, you can dream big and you can do these things, but you can also be the investor that is helping those others dream big and bring their things to life.
It's so important. And even, in our own startup, Emmy, as we're at this moment where we're pivoting from this very successful birth control reminder app and looking at adding this additional benefit, which probably will become a really big company, I find myself in that really interesting position where, as a startup CEO, it is nerve wracking. And sometimes I just put on my investor hat. I'm like, okay, if I'm walking into a board meeting, what am I asking this CEO? And is she doing it? Is she delivering it? And it really, being able to flip back and forth between that lens is very important. It gets me out of my own head, basically.
And it's that role play practice of saying, okay, right now I'm an investor, right now I'm a CEO, right now I'm a board member or an advisor. And I think um, for so many, if you don't wear all the hats at some point,
Mhm.
you aren't prepared for any conversation that you may find yourself in.
Yes, there's another great lesson I've learned about investors. I've been an executive in a couple of publicly traded companies. And I still remember the first time that my team delivered results that moved the needle. Like, we moved the value of the shares in the marketplace. And it was a glorious, deeply satisfying moment. And about 2 weeks later, I realized 10 weeks later, I was going to have to meet with investors again and they'd be expecting more. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is a treadmill. It's not like when you're more junior in your career where you deliver a success and woo, everybody celebrates. Like, you've got a bunch of people who are going to get on a phone call or on a Zoom and they're going to be looking for your next batch of results. And you've got 10 weeks to get that delivered. So you really start metering out your success and your growth at that point.
So, as you look at where you're at right now, both as a serial entrepreneur, female founder in tech, an investor, what is Erynn focusing on as it relates to stepping into your extraordinary going into this next year?
That's such a good question. When when I did my first startup, it was 20 years ago at this point. I was a single mom. I had two toddlers. I had a lot of pressure to make money and to manage my household. And that was very hard. And at this stage in my career, we have four lovely adult children. They're lovely citizens. They're fun to have at a bar. They're just great. I love them to death. The pressure is different, and the pressure I feel now is not, how do I make enough money to make sure I'm taking care of myself and the people I love. The pressure is, in the finite time I have available to me in my career, am I having the biggest impact that I can? Am I really improving the world for the people around me? Am I leaving a long-term impact? Am I changing things to the degree that at this point, with my capability set and relationships, that I am able to do? And that's a big, meaty, existential sort of question to bring to work every day. But I think it's really important that I wrestle with that and that I grapple with that.
Amazing. Erynn, it's been such a pleasure and such a great conversation. Thank you so much. And we will certainly share your LinkedIn with everyone in the show notes. But Continue to get shit done. It's been such a pleasure, and it's going to be fun to watch you and Emmy as you guys go on to the next thing.
Thank you. I love talking to you, Misha. I really appreciate that you gave us this opportunity. And I hope you continue to roll through and do great things and get shit done.
Thank you so much. To our listeners, as always, thank you for listening. And don't forget to get shit done. Thank you for listening to the GSD Factor podcast. I'm your host, Misha Blameyer-Farish. Be sure to connect with me on LinkedIn or Instagram, as I love connecting with our listeners to hear how you are getting shit done in your personal and professional life. Be sure to visit our website at gsdfactor.com, where you can take a persona assessment that's going to help you figure out what type of GSDer you are. There's also a ton of resources and tools for both yourself and your tiny humans in your life. We appreciate you rating and subscribing our podcast episode today. And don't forget to get shit done.